You're listening to The Extra Real with Ger Brown
and Colin Ryan for a look at the bigger picture of film.
with films from around the world,
Through the decades,
from movies you know and love.
to movies you need to discover.
This week on the show, it's our Halloween horror special. So myself and Colin, we're going to look at 6 horror films. We'll talk a bit about our selection criteria in a minute. But so this episode, six. A whopping 6 films. So Colin, one of the big things about picking 6 films in any genre is if you go towards if you're talking about lists, that's a hiding to nothing. So this isn't like an exclusive list of the 6 best films. These are probably 6 films that we've selected because we feel like we want to watch them. But certainly that's the way I've approached it with the films that I've picked, and that there are films that I for one reason or another, I either love them or there's something about them that I think is ripe for either rediscovery, and that people need to kind of go back to or look at. So what was your reason for picking your films?
I love coming to films with like a fresh set of eyes. Like 2 of the films I hadn't seen before, but I read a good bit about, or they'd been maybe recommended to me. And the 3rd film I picked was one I'd seen in the cinema, but hadn't rewatched since. And the first time I liked it, but I couldn't get what it was that was so great about it. And I think on the second viewing, I got a lot more out of it.
Yeah, so for my picks, I've gone with The Night of the Living Dead, the 1968 original. I've gone with the 1977 Suspiria original. And I'm sure if there had been an original, which is the only version of it, I probably would have gone with it. But Near Dark from 1987 by Kathryn Bigelow. What did you go with?
I went for The House of the Devil, directed by Ty West, and it was actually recommended to me by the show's composer, Ben Hall. I've gone for The Bird with the Crystal Plumage, also directed by Dario Argento from 1970. And I've gone for Ari Aster's film Hereditary from 2018.
There are so many great films that we could have looked at in so many different variations. We've gone from stuff that pretty much spans from the late 60s up to the present day, and we're not in any way ignoring, there's the very inception of film. There's great horror films, or there's the horror genre has been tackled. And, look at, these are films that I probably benefit from the likes of German Expressionism, that benefit from the work of the likes of Jack Turner, Val Lewton and all of that. So these are films that have, I suppose, our selections are films that are feeding off of all of those things, and literature and stuff in general as well.
Very much
So so I went with the Night of the Living Dead simply because, shock horror, I haven't seen it. It wasn't one that I grew up with. It's not one that I had any burning desire to see. In fact, it probably snobbishly, when your Twitter handle is Irish Film Snob, you've got to embrace it. I probably ignored it, and which is really bad form. I flicked it on, and something I was really impressed with is the documentary realism of the film, and just again, like I think pretty much all of the films that I've selected, and I'm pretty much sure with some of the ones that I've seen on your list, that the sound design is just so important.
Super important.
And I just thought it was like, it's seen as a seminal film with all of the connections to things like the civil rights movement and stuff like that. And for anyone who hasn't seen it, which I think is pretty few and far between, it's basically 7 people barricaded in a house with a load of zombies coming at them. That concept alone is just brilliant.
Yeah.
So it shouldn't be a bag of rubbish, and it isn't. I just thought that casting wise, they all seem pretty much on the money for it. Dwayne Jones is Ben, Night of the Living Dead. It's not his African American origin isn't referenced, so that side of it is important. Was that a major factor for me the other night? Not really. I thought it's the building of tension when they're in the house, and the paranoia between the group, I thought was interesting. I think if it falls down in any area, it's that maybe some of the action isn't as dynamic that of films that came after it, and maybe some of the music is a little bit OTT for my liking. But in general, the sound design is cool. And the end of it, with the documentary realism, is really, it's quite vicious actually. It really hits home. And it's one of those things that I really like about the genre is that you don't have to have a happy ending all the time. And that's when I see some more modern horror films, you're like, and you see the ending and it's a happy ending. You're like, really, you've just not really bothered here, have you? You know. So that's my feeling on Night of the Living Dead. Have you seen that?
I think I have, but it's been a long, long time. I was one of those people who grew up with the whole kind of Channel 4 and Bravo late night kind of viewing on Friday and Saturday nights once the parents had gone to bed kind of thing. I stayed
Yeah.
up till 2 a.m. watching horror films. I think I saw it during that time, but I haven't seen it since. Would you think it's definitely worth a rewatch?
Oh, I would, and like it's made me want to watch the Tom Savini remake, and I know there's another remake in 2006, and like the one thing that's striking about it is obviously it's in black and white,
Yeah,
and the fact that it was colorized in the 80s, so they had that fad for colorizing everything around the mid 80s to the
yeah,
90s. I can't imagine it being an asset to it. Like it never looks
no,
good anyway. It's a stark contrast to another pick of mine, Suspiria, where color is like really
everything.
dominant.
Yeah,
Everything about the film,
yeah,
and actually, I think we've seen it with some more recent horror films going back to black and white, and I think that's an approach that really works as well as lighting everything with primary colors. So,
no, completely.
um, and I think sometimes works even more so. Like there are other films that I was thinking of that were like some of my favorite horror films are black and white. Whether
Yeah,
it's something like The Cat People or I Walked with a Zombie, or ones that I've really kind of come to recently, films like Chronico, and not strictly speaking a horror film, but Marketa Lazarova has elements of horror films. That stark black and whiteness really works.
yeah.
So give us one of your picks.
So yeah, so it's interesting you say there's a bit of a weird segue from Night of the Living Dead to The House of the Devil from 2009, directed by Ty West. In that, there's a scene in the film where the character is watching the protagonist, Samantha Hughes, played by Jocelyn Dunn, who is watching Night of the Living Dead on the
Right.
TV. So
I
basically, the
mean, I watched
story.
it deliberately just so we could have that segue,
Yeah, exactly. uh, so it's about like this struggling college student who takes on a babysitting assignment at an isolated house where things take a turn for the worse. So it's not exactly an original film, I guess, and it's kind of more deals with the occult and stuff like that. But what makes it so brilliant, I think, is how it's shot. It's shot on 16 millimeter. It's got like lots of this. It starts off with like kind of 80s style music. You can tell it's kind of set in like 1983 or something like that. It's got all these kind of 80s style slow zooms, freeze frames, kind of this kind of yellow writing stopping to say directed by and starring and all that kind of stuff. And it's very much kind of a character led piece. So you kind of follow this character, Samantha, for the whole film. And you can see that at the start, she's trying to get somewhere to live because her housing situation is awful. Her housemate who lives in the same room as her is just a complete slob. Um, and you can tell from the character that she's kind of struggling. And even though she's got her best friend Megan, who's played by Greta Gerwig in one of her earlier roles, seems to be from a rich family and offers to help her out. Samantha's like, no, look, I need to get some money. So she picks up an ad and it advertises this kind of babysitting assignment. And when she kind of tries to meet the person who she calls, he stands her up and then she's like, oh, screw this. And then she gets a call later and he says, look, oh, apologies about that. I had someone else that fell through. Can you please come to this address tonight? It has to be tonight. And also throughout the film, you realize that there's kind of this kind of eclipse happening. This kind of full lunar eclipse is going to happen, and everyone's talking about it, but you don't really know why. And so Samantha, she decides to go to this house, and her friend Megan drives her, Greta Gerwig character, and on the way, it's one of those typical the house in the middle of nowhere. And when they meet the main character, Mr. Ullman, played by Tom Noonan, who you probably know from things like Manhunter and stuff like that. It's got like a brilliant kind of I don't know. He's got a very kind of expressionless face, and he's very tall, so he's kind of got this brilliant presence about him. And he tells Samantha, he's like, look, actually, this isn't really a babysitting assignment. All you have to do is stay in the house. It's actually my grandmother you're minding, or my wife's mother you're minding. But it's okay. Don't worry about it. I'll pay you $400 instead of the $100 I was originally going to pay you. And Samantha takes it, but her friend Megan, who was going to stay with her for the night, she decides, you know what, screw this, I'm gone. And from there, you always have a sense of it's pretty much Samantha in the house on her own, but you kind of hear these odd creaks, something's off, something's a bit weird. There's a brilliant scene where she's dancing around the house with her Walkman on, because it's the 80s, and she knocks over something. And then from there, she finds something, and it's like, oh, something's not right here. So it's kind of a film kind of about the occult and stuff like that. You can tell that the character of Mr. Ullman and his wife, they're this eclipse. This is the reason why they're here, you know. But it's a great film. I do really enjoy it. I mean, maybe the last act isn't as good as the rest of the film at building tension, but it's quite a low budget film. I think the budget was less than $1 million for it, and it kind of builds up tension by doing very simple things like little creaks, little sounds. It will only show you a sudden thing, really, rather than like just constant jump scares or anything like that.
Yeah, I've only seen one of Ty West's films, but I was impressed in The Valley of Violence, his western.
Yeah.
But it seemed, yeah, it's pretty good. Ethan Hawke and John Travolta are in it. What I found was that it's not, it didn't feel like a film that wanted to spend a whole pile of time sitting around with characters moping at the campfire, not looking at Hostiles, by the way.
Yeah.
It wanted to be fun from the get-go, and it opens with a bombastic music score. So did you feel like that this film was a lean genre piece that wanted to entertain?
Yeah, very much so. I feel like, because I'd seen his film The Innkeepers a few years ago, and I loved that as well. I loved how it just built tension slowly. But yeah, he's really, like, I think one thing with some horror films, they can maybe character kind of can go out the window because it's just looking for a jump scare or something like that. But I love here that just sticks with the characters, and it's kind of just little things a character can say or do can change everything. And I did actually love that it was kind of a character-led piece. It was kind of a cool way to show how to make a horror film. It doesn't have to be all, let's show you this piece of gory stuff, or let's show you this. You can actually just have kind of the human drama at the center of it, you know?
Your next one is The Bird with the Crystal Plumage.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, no worries. Directed by Dario Argento.
So we both, we're both gone for Argento, so that says an awful lot about his place in the genre.
No, definitely. And it's his first film he directed, isn't it?
Yeah. So prior to that, he'd written a couple of spaghetti westerns and a few other bits and pieces.
Yeah.
I would say check out Five Man Army, and I would say, obviously, he did his little bit of work with Leone on Once Upon a Time in the West.
The West, yeah.
But check out Five Man Army if you want something that's slight but entertaining. Yeah. Lots of action.
So it's about this American writer who has a bit of writer's block, and it's a bit of it starts a bit strangely, I felt, because it was like this American writer, he has writer's block, so he's told, go to Rome, relax, and then he takes on a job writing manuals about rare birds. So straight away, that's a real Argento thing, I think, because it's like the story will be straightforward in a sense, but it will always have this kind of weirdness and strangeness to it, you know. And you have the cast is pretty cool. You've got Tony Musante as Sam Damas, Susie Kendall as his girlfriend Julia, what's his name, Inspector Marcini, Enrico Mayo Salerno. I think my favorite character in the whole thing was the pimp Garulu, played by Gildo DeMarco, because he's got like just this amazing face and the way he speaks and stuff. But yeah, it's about this kind of writer who's got writer's block, and he sees a woman being attacked in an art gallery, and he goes to help her, but then he's kind of locked in between these two glass doors. And from there's like a police investigation, but he finds himself kind of carried into that investigation. And it was a very like popular film. I think it played at like a Milan cinema for like 3.5 years. It's seen as one of the first films of the Giallo era as well. There's cool little things in it, like that Argento put his own hands in for the murder scenes. So there's scenes where it's just shots of hands and stuff like that, and that's kind of interesting. There's obviously Argento would be known for, and you're going to talk about soon, is probably his use of color. Production design is amazing. There's a kind of iconic kind of bus station scene where Sam Damas has been chased by this kind of other guy who's trying to kill him, and it's a real kind of like, the film goes in all these different twists and turns in the plot and stuff like that, because obviously he's kind of on the hunt for this kind of serial killer who's going around killing these young women who seem to live on their own, and you kind of don't really know where it's going to go. And it's got like, the music is by Ennio Morricone, and the score is interesting. It's not exactly a typical horror score. I felt it's very kind of light and breezy,
Yeah.
And Vittorio Storaro, of course, was a cinematographer, and it's his first film in color as well, and it's beautiful to look at.
What about things like the identity of the murderer? Was that something that was important to you, or you don't want to have a spoiler, do you?
Well, I think it's 50
I
years old by
spoil
now.
away,
I think people haven't seen it, that it's kind of the... Yeah, he finds out that the woman he thought he was going to save in the art gallery is actually criminally insane, and she's been the one, along with her husband, who've been kind of, committing all these murders around Rome. Yeah, it's a strange one. I think Eva Renzi wasn't a big fan of the film. I think she almost disowned it afterwards, but it was obviously a huge hit. Yeah, that's kind of it, like, and also there's kind of a cool like kind of camera stuff with it, in that apparently when Alberto Ranieri, her husband, when he jumps out of the window, they took a camera and threw it out a window and broke it, but the actual footage was still intact.
Right, didn't know that.
And there's also that scene, I really enjoyed that scene where he meets the artist.
Yeah.
Who has these questionable food choices.
Yeah.
He likes his cats a bit too much.
A little bit too much.
Yeah.
And the characters I thought was interesting was police chief, because I mean at the time there was an awful lot of corruption and stuff like that, and I don't think an awful lot of the young people in Italy had much love for the cops, because it was kind of a rebellious period. There was an awful lot of social unrest, and apparently the cops could just stop you, particularly students and stuff. They could just stop you on the street, and so I thought it was interesting that they're like the initial stuff with Musante and whatever, where he's being interrogated, like he feels like he's being wronged, and you can kind of see that coming through.
Yeah, and he's trying to return to America, and they're like, "Give us your passport.
Give us your passport." Go. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I thought that was interesting. For me, it's a film that works in fits and starts. I think the set pieces are cool, like the foot chase, like some of the murders are inventive. The sound design is frightening, and the end revelation stuff, it works. But it's like, right, off you go, back on the plane. There you go. Bye bye.
Yeah. It's like it is very Hitchcockian in a sense, but it's also a bit less dry. It's kind of more fun, I guess, in ways.
Yeah.
There's like weird elements of comedy that just come out of nowhere. So you're kind of like trying to get into this, like almost like figure out this whole mystery of it, and then you'll just have this bizarre scene, like even in that scene where he's being chased by this guy in this yellow jacket. Yeah. And then he goes to he follows, and then it's like cat and mouse, and then suddenly he becomes the cat and follows the guy in the yellow jacket, and then he goes to this like kind of ex-boxers conference, and they're all wearing these yellow jackets, and it's just like, when you were writing a script, where did this scene even come from, Yeah. And what does it add,
Yeah, I suppose it's in that sense it's more fun than some of those other maybe Hitchcock knockoffs, and obviously we're they're living in a post-Psycho, post-Peeping Tom world, where all of those influencers are kind of circling. And then you've got, I think afterwards there was like a slew of giallos where the woman was the person who did it, like, it was female villains and whatnot. So Argento was super influential on the genre as a whole for a number of years, and while he made a few of those, he got tired of it, and that led to something like Suspiria, which is kind of a serious departure, really, in that it's not a straightforward giallo. I mean, it's not set in Italy. I've seen various things. Some will just say it's set in a European dance academy. Others will say it was set in Freiburg, but it was shot around Munich, so he's not even in Italy. And even though some of the actors are no doubt Italian, it's not really alluded to, or it's not, explicitly said that this person is Italian. There's a couple of things to say about Suspiria. First of all, do I prefer this to the remake? Well, I think this is the film for me of the two. I love Luca Guadagnino, but I really hoped that film was going to be a great film, and I think it's got some really really interesting stuff, which was obviously bubbling around in the background of the original when the original film was being made. Things like the Red Brigades and all of that sort of stuff, and the social unrest that was going on across Europe. And I love the way that they incorporated that into the new one. I thought the casting of Tilda Swinton and Jewel Rhodes was stunt casting, and I think it was unnecessary. It was there's some really good elements in the new Suspiria, but it doesn't even come close. And I think one of the key areas that it lacked for me, despite being highly cinematic with some great sound design elements, is that it kind of lacks the fun factor.
Yeah, I'm not actually a big fan of the remake at all.
Yeah.
I think I went in expecting something like the original.
Yeah.
And it's a much slower film, and it's almost in the way that the original brings all that colour onto the screen. The remake, I felt, almost drained all that colour out.
So getting back to the original, it's not a film where there's a whole pile of character stuff. It's a strange one in that I feel like if you were actually to run it through a script analysis, or run it through maybe, McKee or someone like that, you're going to be going, well, what do we know about the character at the end, or what's her arc? Like, I have no idea what her arc is, but I'm pretty sure at the start she doesn't know what's going on, and I'm fairly sure at the end she doesn't really know much about what's going on either. So from that point of view, it shouldn't work. But it's a film which is high on visual poetry. So we've spoken about the set design. We've spoken about the visuals, like Luciano Tovoli. I mean, it looks great.
Oh yeah.
And then it's driven by the Goblin score, which is, again, it's integral, because it kicks in, and it's the sound design of the score that creates this strange unease throughout. And the scenes of violence they're graphic in their own way, but they're not off-puttingly graphic. But throughout, we're peppered with other little bits and pieces, like the use of red, like somebody pouring a glass of wine down a sink. Yes, we know it's a glass of wine, but it might as well be blood. There is that kind of shorthand with some of the elements that ramp up the imagined or perceived violence of the film. It's a very strange film from the point of view of, it's not a film where you're leaning on it from the point of view of the script. It's very much the aesthetics, but it really works, and all of those elements combined, driven together, just really work. I just think it's a film that's really really immersive.
It is. I saw it on a cinema screen. I think you were with me a few years ago. We saw it.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just a complete kind of, it's an audiovisual experience, and it's almost a film that is, as you say, it's not really about the plot or the characters. It's just more about, like, I think it's kind of a film that's really kind of influenced lots of kind of modern filmmaking. Like, someone just off the top of my head, of course, very popular in the shows, Gaspar Noé.
Yeah.
Like something like Enter the Void, just that kind of neon lighting.
Or Climax.
Like, yeah. Or like someone like Nicholas Winding Refn. Some of his stuff, kind of like that kind of use of red and use of like really kind of immersive kind of sound. And of course, you've obviously got the Goblin soundtrack, which is nearly as famous as the film itself.
Yeah. And like the cast, the cast is fantastic. You've got Jessica Harper, you've got Joan Bennett, who was one of 4 people to be kind of in the shortlist to play Scarlett O'Hara. And obviously she missed out. And apparently Selznick gave her the opportunity to cast her 10-year-old daughter as Scarlett O'Hara's daughter, and she told him to take a running jump. Who else? And Alida Valli, Italian actress who was in films like Senso, is in it. Udo Kier is in it as well. So like, it's cast wise, it's from that point of view, it's great. But that wouldn't be enough. I mean, there are plenty of horror duds that have amazing casts, and you're just going, well, no, this isn't working. But this film is just, it's a treat, and every time you revisit it, there's just something new that you find. Also, what's also very interesting is that the men in this film are very ineffectual. They're not the accents of change or action in the film really at all, and it's the women who take the center stage. So I suppose a lot has been leveled at Argento for being misogynistic, but I don't really feel like it is a misogynistic film in the way that that others have labelled it. Yes, the women get killed, but it's not very gratuitous. There isn't, it's not a film where there's loads of gratuitous nudity or anything.
So I guess, like, speaking of strong female directors, do you want to talk about Kathryn Bigelow's Near Dark?
Yeah, so I suppose Kathryn Bigelow's Near Dark is nearly the opposite in some ways when it comes to like the script side of things, because it's a film where I feel like the narrative and the script and the character development is really strong. It's kind of a modern western. It focuses on this rancher who's out on a night out, and he gets picked up, or attempts to pick up, a lady at the local bar, and gets a little bit more than he bargained for. After being bitten, he's brought into a family of vampires. It's basically a mix of the best from the Aliens franchise. So you've got Lance Henriksen, you've got Bill Paxton, and you've got Jeanette Goldstein. The opening scene with Caleb, played by Adrian Pasdar, and May, played by Jenny Wright. It's really, if you took the vampire element out of it, it's a really tender, intimate sequence. There's that extra element bubbling in the background. She wants to get home. He can't figure out why. He's like, oh, is your pa gonna whoop you when you get home or something? And it's like, no, there's something else bubbling. So it creates an element of drama in the scene. You've all those little elements, and when we finally get to meet all the characters, they're really well defined. In fact, Henriksen came up with his character's backstory, and he was he'd traced his character back to being 100 and something years old and all this sort of stuff. And I think it was probably encouraged with the others, but in the stuff that I've seen, Henriksen is the one that talks at length about his character's backstory. He seems to be obsessive once he's cast in something, very intense. And there's loads of mad stories of Henriksen going off, just being like on the way to the set. He picked up a hitchhiker, and he was kind of dressed as he was going to be in the film, and was asking the guy to roll him a cigarette, and he kind of started annoying him by saying things like, is that how you roll a cigarette? Roll it better than that. And then when he finally got the cigarette, he kind of held it up, looked at it, and like, is that really how you roll a cigarette? And threw it out the window. And the guy just really wanted to get it. Like, I'd say he thought he was going to die on the way. And apparently on another night, they were leaving the set late, and Paxton and himself were still dressed in their gear, and like, Henriksen has a scar on it, and he's got like this ponytail that's been dipped in tar, and they obviously looked the sight, but they were speeding down the motorway anyway, and they could see speed limits and stuff like that, but they were breaking them. Eventually a cop pulled them over anyway, and instead of playing it cool and being sound about things, Henriksen was kind of like glaring at the cop and stuff. And apparently it got to the point where the guy was freaked out and went for his gun, but then just left him off. Paxton was saying it was a moment that it was quite hairy, and he said personally, he himself, because apparently back in the day when he was growing up in Fort Worth, that he was a bit of a tearaway as well, and had a bit of an issue with authority. So the two of them went hand in hand for that. But he said that was a close moment. So getting back to the film, there are lots of vampire films. There are lots of vampire films from the 80s onwards. This is a film that came out the same week as The Lost Boys.
It has that look, doesn't it? It has a kind of similar...
It does.
That kind of look, yeah.
The difference is, I suppose, the budget. This is a budget of $5 million. And it didn't do well when it came out. So it's a film... I think it did about $3.5 million when it came out. The Lost Boys obviously blasted through it. I think The Lost Boys made 32 million or something like that. So, but it obviously had the studio behind it pushing that. For me, the thing about it is it's the aesthetics. Like, on top of the script is really strong. It's got a really cool Tangerine Dream score, who were just eating it up at that time, with everything from Manhunter to Risky Business and Thief. Yeah. So it's got that element to it. Visually, it does look great, and it feels like kind of a scaled down version of Terminator. Of course, it's got the same cinematographer as Terminator, Adam Greenberg. He does a great job. And there are a couple of action set pieces. It's not littered with action, but it's got such a lean running time that they kind of flow well into each other. Like the climactic set piece is a sequence with a truck, which is really well done. Feels very like Terminator. There's a shootout which feels Peckinpah-esque. This would prove to be a stepping stone towards things like Point Break, where she's an action director, and her action sequences in her films are usually tense, also quite poetic as well. Like, there's sequences in films like The Hurt Locker where the action sequences are both tense and poetic, and this has definitely got elements of that. It feels like sometimes when people are trying to ape Peckinpah, it doesn't look great, or they slow down the wrong part and speed up
speed up the wrong part.
Yeah, kind of. There's a rawness, there's a viciousness to the energy, and so that there's a sequence with a shootout with some cops, and that's pretty good. But the sequence that really just wins this film for me is there's a bar massacre, and it's so cool. It's got endlessly quotable dialogue, like Finger Looking Good from Bill Paxton when he kills some guy. There's a sequence where he kills another guy with the spurs on his boots, and it's just the sound design of that. So it's a film with some great set pieces and a great payoff as well. I think it's one of the best vampire films, full stop. Another thing was that they filmed it at night, well, obviously, and that 40, I think out of 47 days, 40 or something of the nights were 40 of the days were night shoots, and it was cold, even though it was set in the summertime. They obviously weren't shooting in the summertime, and so the actors had to wear summer clothing and stuff. So that would be bad enough, but the way you've got that vapor in your mouth and whatnot when you're cold. So to get rid of that, the only way to do it without CGI, which they obviously didn't have access to at the time, was to have ice cubes in your mouth. Yeah.
Amazing.
Apparently, to make the characters smoke, like their skin smoke and smolder, they put like the usual makeup stuff on, but they punctured it with like little holes and fed tubes down through their clothes and connected like 4 or 5 lit cigars, and the smoke ran through that, so it was all cigar smoke. So they ended up smelling like a big old stogie.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. I really want to see it. Actually, it's actually quite a hard film to find online, so I might have to invest in a DVD or Blu-ray of it.
Maybe I'll get you a Christmas present.
So in 2019, my favorite film of the year was Midsummer, directed by Ari Aster.
Yeah.
But I've gone to look at his film previous to that, Hereditary, from 2018. Mainly because when I saw it in the cinema, I saw it on a piping hot summer's day, and it was probably the complete wrong atmosphere to see it in. And it's a film with a lot going on in it. I mean, I think was it Toni Collette said that like Ari Aster was one of the most prepared directors she's ever worked with. And what I love about the film is that as much as it's a horror film, it's kind of more about kind of family dynamics as well. Like they did things like so the story about it is obviously after the death of like a secretive grandmother, a family start to be haunted by this mysterious presence within their home. And you've got like Toni Collette as the mother, who's like kind of this kind of miniatures artist. So she makes, so the film opens with an amazing shot where you see this kind of miniature house, and then the camera zooms into the miniature house, and then you're within the real house. And she seems to paint miniatures of, or make miniatures of everything that's kind of happened in her life. And obviously her and her mother had a very kind of strange relationship, because her mother seemed to have being involved with the occult in some way. It's kind of vague from the start, but that seems to kind of be causing a bit of an issue with her children. Alex Wolff as her teenage son Graham, and then Molly Shapiro as like her daughter Charlie, who's a bit of an odd child. Like she's obsessed with strange things. Like she finds a dead bird and cuts its head off and carries it around. She always sleeps in a treehouse, stuff like that. And then you've got Gabriel Byrne as her husband Steve Graham, and they seem to have a good enough relationship, but you can tell it's kind of strained. And apparently one of the things that Ari Aster did was in his casting. So Gabriel Byrne and Alex Wolff had worked together before in the TV series In Treatment, so they knew each other. And then Alex Wolff and Millie Shapiro went to school together. So these three actors kind of knew each other, but Toni Collette didn't know them really. So he kind of kept her separate so that when you're watching the film, you get this idea that there's kind of this strain within the family dynamic. So it's a really it's got like an amazing kind of atmosphere to it. Colin Sense's music is outstanding. Cinematography is really cool by Pavel Pogorzelski. And yeah, I do love that a lot of the film he uses master shots for characters, so you kind of have this idea that you're looking in on them, and like just little things like that, like there's loads of practical effects in it. There's kind of seance scenes and stuff like that, and it's with stuff writing on chalkboards and things like that. And it's kind of a film that, yeah, it's a modern horror, so it could have used a lot of CGI, but they kind of stick with practical effects throughout. And there's this kind of idea throughout the film about kind of decapitation. You hear that in a few years ago, that the character Vanny, that one morning she woke up sleepwalking and she'd covered her two children in lighter fluid and she was holding a lit match, things like that. So kind of this little kind of family history stuff comes back into it. And you've also got like the kind of the grandmother's presence throughout. You've got this kind of feeling of like, oh, something's going on here, something bad is going to happen. And yeah, it's an excellent film. I really didn't pick up on, when I first saw it, I really didn't pick up on some of the occult stuff and some of the little kind of symbols and stuff like that throughout. So it's kind of film that really, really, like when you watch it again and you pick up on more of the story, because the ending is so, like, there's so much going on towards the end of it that it really comes together well, that I didn't actually feel the first time.
Yeah. I think what stood out for me the first time I watched it was the oh fuck moments.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
it's an unsettling film, it's an unsettling watch. A lot of it is stuff that, there's elements with the characters, like the little girl is very weird and you just want her to stop eating at the funeral and stuff like that. I was getting ticked off at her. And but there are moments in this film where you just go, oh fuck.
Yeah.
Big time.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen too often, and I think as you hit the nail on the head with the practical effects. Personally, I prefer them.
Oh, me too.
I came to this after having seen Midsommar, and I think maybe if I'd seen Hereditary first, maybe I wouldn't have liked Midsommar as much as I did. But I thought they were both really, really impressive. Visually, just really exciting, really bold, purely confident filmmaking.
No, definitely. And you can see he prepares so much, and yeah, it got a great performances out of the characters as well, of the actors, sorry. And yeah, he really does stand out in the kind of the modern, and I've read interviews where he kind of says, oh, I'm not really a horror director, but he really understands the genre very well.
What else did you watch over the last few weeks? You've been busy kind of prepping for this. Why those films and not some other films that you watched?
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I watched a lot of kind of cool little kind of more kind of lower budget stuff. I watched this film from 2015 called They Look Like People, directed by Perry Blackshear, which is kind of like this cool kind of like almost a buddy drama / psychological horror. I think people should check it out. Then a film, it's probably going to be one of my favorite films of the year, the Japanese kind of horror comedy One Cut of the Dead, directed by Shinichiro Ueda from 2017. That's a really, I don't want to talk too much about that film because I feel people should just go watch it. It's kind of a horror film and a comedy film, but it's a film about filmmaking for me, and the joy of filmmaking, and that's why I would really recommend it. And then I also saw a film from this year, directed by Rob Savage, called Host, which takes place in a Zoom conversation. So it's only 56 minutes long, but I don't know if people are rushing to see it if they've been in a lot of Zoom conversations this year.
Yeah.
But it's still got some kind of a bit of a downer, but it's still kind of like, and I wouldn't say that the film is completely successful for me, but it does have some kind of cool elements to it, and how it was made is extremely interesting.
And 56 minutes is not too taxing on the time scale.
Exactly. Thank you very much for listening. You can contact the show by emailing to extrareal@gmail.com. Search for the Extra Real Podcast on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can listen to the show on Spotify, iTunes, or anywhere you get your podcast from.